Spring is here, and so I decided to do a virtual spring cleaning of my Steam library and try a bunch of the more obscure or lesser known roguelites that I picked up over the years. These are my 1 minute long first impressions of these games, and I played all of them at least a couple runs or a couple hours each. I'll talk about what these games are, what I like and don't like about them, and whether I plan to actually keep playing them or put them back on the metaphorical Steam shelf. Also, for this video, I'm going to define obscure as less than 1,000 reviews on Steam, but I'll put the number of reviews next to each game title when I talk about it, so that you can get a rough idea of how popular each of these games actually are. So let's get into it. Let's start with Asura Vengeance Edition, which is an action roguelite that draws on Indian folklore, something that I don't see a lot of other games do. Playing through it, there are some nice combat systems in the game. There's a stamina system, you have to balance a melee and ranged weapon with different costs, as well as a skill tree that's randomized with different active and passive abilities that you unlock within each run. I also enjoy the looting mechanic, where you can choose to use a kill enemy for leveling yourself up and upgrading yourself that way, or you can use a killed enemy for items and gold, depending on what you want for a certain run. The combat itself feels good, but it's also not amazing. It's responsive, but there were occasional elements that felt clunky to me, such as when a melee attack didn't register a hit on an enemy when I felt that it should have. I also thought that the map layout felt a little bland to me. You basically just fight your way through a series of square rooms of slightly different sizes. Overall, I do think that I will play this game more in the future, so like the theme and the story that came along with a very detailed opening cutscene. I also want to further explore the leveling up and item systems of the game that I liked in my first pass. But I doubt that this will be a 100-hour game because of some of those flaws that I mentioned earlier, and it isn't top of my list of games to revisit because of those flaws. Crowntakers is a turn-based tactical RPG roguelite that gave me generally good first impressions. You navigate an overworld with merchants, random events, and enemy fights that bring you into a turn-based hexagonal battlefield. You control a hero and party of mercenaries that you can customize by leveling them up, upgrading their equipment, and giving them runes or modifiers. It has two different difficulty levels, or really two different ways of playing the game. The first allows you to keep mercenary levels across runs, or basically your allies stay stronger, which gives you a strong vertical progression if the game is too challenging for you. And the other game mode is the more traditional roguelite experience, which is the one I played, where nothing carries over across runs, except for unlocking additional mercenaries you can find on future runs. I gave this game several runs, and I enjoyed it. There are a lot of mechanics I'm still figuring out how to master, such as the enemy difficulty, scaling as you loot more, how to best maximize that, but it also had a couple difficulty spikes that were either super punishing, or showed that I'm just missing something important in the game in terms of the mechanics. My biggest concern with this game so far is that it seems to be lacking a bit in terms of enemy variety, but as a whole, it seems like a fun, if slightly simple, turn-based RPG roguelite that I will play more of in the future. But, like Asura, it's not top of my list of games to replay. Next, The Dungeon Beneath is a turn-based tactical roguelite auto-battler. You climb down floors of a dungeon and fight teams of enemies with your own team. You have a hero who has both powerful effects and needs to survive, or you lose your run, and you have a bunch of weaker units in front of your hero that revive at the end of each fight. You move your units around each turn in order to optimize their attack order and pattern, with the goal of defeating the enemy hero on the other side in order to win the fight. Between fights, you have more RPG elements with leveling up your party, expanding or replacing your party members for a better composition, and buying and selling new items that have various effects on your heroes or other units. As a whole, I enjoyed this core gameplay loop. It feels fun, and it's also not overly slow or passive because of the game speed options. I liked building up my party across fights, as well as the placement strategy within each fight. My only big negative with the game so far is that I had one of my runs ended by an incredibly hard fight that seemed basically unbeatable. So I'm a little worried about RNG playing a potentially frustrating role in this game might make it a little more annoying to play. Still, this game falls strongly into my will play more category, and I'm eager to give it more runs in the future. Genesis Alpha 1 is an FPS-based exploration and shipbuilding roguelite that has a very unique feel to it. You build up and customize your ship, collect resources from planets and debris, and defend your ship from aliens that try to attack you. There are a lot of really cool things in this game that I like, such as how you plan in your ship customizations, how the clones or your units work, and the overall vibe of the game, which really makes it feel like a space exploration game between the music, the ship aesthetic, the alien worlds, all these elements. But there are also a lot of things that I don't really love about it, like the clunky controls, for example. But really my biggest complaint with the game is that the core gameplay loop just felt off to me. It felt like I was playing a strategy game or a city builder that throws you in a first-person game, as opposed to a true first-person game built from the ground up. For example, the game draws from city builders in terms of managing resources, making sure each part of your ship is able to do its job through queuing up tasks, managing crew members, and keeping alien infestations at bay, which was not particularly fun for me, because it felt like, at a lot of times, I was basically just running around my ship and searching for alien nests to shoot that were hiding under some corner or under the floor. So will I play this game again? I'm not entirely sure, but I think that it's unlikely that I'll give it another go. There are a lot of really cool things in this game that might make it appealing for some. It has a great spaceship, space builder, space exploration vibe to it, but the gameplay loop just felt tedious and unengaging to me. Going Under is an action roguelite that has a satirical take on business, startups, and capitalism more broadly. The combat at its core is pretty standard for action roguelites, with standard attacks, dodges, and skills and upgrades. However, Going Under does, of course, have some unique twists to it, such as being able to use basically anything you find as a weapon, and weapons also break after enough uses, forcing you to constantly improvise and pick up new weapons throughout your run. Overall, the combat feels good, though it felt a little clunky to me at first before you kind of get the controls down and get used to the tight rooms you have to fight in. I really enjoyed the story and satire elements of the game. I thought that they were generally amusing and entertaining, so that's something that has drawn me into the game as well. The game also has progression across runs, and the option to fight through different dungeons with different themes, items, enemies, and boss fights. The biggest downside of the game so far for me is that the combat felt good, but not amazing. I still enjoyed it, but the combat alone might not sell the game for me, at least not yet from what I've experienced. I definitely plan to play this game more in the future though, to see what that combat has to offer, and to explore more of the environment, ambiance, and story that has really drawn me into the game, and that I really want to see more of. GoNNER is a punishing 2D platformer roguelite with a very chaotic energy to it. The gameplay itself involves running through rooms and killing enemies when you want to or need to, by either shooting them with various weapons you find, or jumping on top of them to do damage that way. The game has a nice combo system, nice enemy variety from the start, and unique art style and exploration mechanic where the map is unveiled as you near the edges of it. You can't see that far, your field of view is limited. But a lot of other systems in the game were unintuitive, and to me, it was the most confusing of the games that I played in this video. I didn't really understand what a lot of the mechanics were as I played through it, such as the different heads you can pick up, and how you fall apart every time you take damage. You kind of have to collect yourself whenever you're hit. This unintuitive nature is an intentional design choice where you have to learn everything on your own. It doesn't hold your hand, as people like to say, but I was confused nonetheless. As I mentioned earlier, this is also a punishing game, and you'll pretty quickly find yourself dropped into rooms with a ton of enemies that you'll have to clear out. So while this game has some perks to it, it doesn't seem like a game that I want to keep playing. Between my confusion and the punishing nature of the game, I wasn't having fun playing it, and so for that reason, it goes back on the Steam shelf. Now let's talk about Iris and the Giant, which is a card game roguelite with a melancholic theme to it. You fight against Iris's inner demons using cards. What separates Iris from other card game roguelites is that each card disappears after one use. So you have to use your cards more deliberately, and you frequently pick up more cards to flesh out your deck. You have to, otherwise you run out of cards and lose your run. The game also mixes in cutscenes and story elements, explaining both Iris's background and the imaginary world you're fighting through, what that symbolizes. The game actually has more depth to it than I first expected, with alternative paths and secret puzzle-like challenges you can find, as well as different skills, memories, and traits you can unlock that modify your run in various ways. But the game also felt lacking compared to some other card game roguelites in other ways. Most notably, because you only use a card once and then it's gone, it doesn't feel like a deck builder where your synergies and combos matter. Because your deck is constantly turning over and changing, you can't really build up those synergies in the same way you can in other games like Slay the Spire or Monster Train. So as a whole, I think this game is decent. It has some unique elements and more depth than I expected at a first glance. But it also lacks some of the fun combos and synergies you'd expect from card game roguelites because of that impermanence. I wouldn't mind playing this game more in the future, but as with some other games I mentioned in this video, it's not at the top of my list. Next, let's talk about Mask Up, which is a platformer roguelite by a solo dev. It's a fairly simple game, but it brings some unique concepts. As you fight through the levels, you collect more health, and if you collect enough, you can transform into two more powerful forms with more versatile and stronger movesets. If you take damage in these stronger forms, you'll regress into your weaker forms. So your health bar can both power you up and of course just serve as a normal health bar. You can also pick up items that modify your run, such as giving you a gun that lets you shoot in addition to your normal moveset. As a whole, it's a simple but fun game. There's an okay amount of content in it between the items, enemy variety, and masks to collect, but it's not really a game that has a large amount of depth to it. Further, it's also not as polished as many other games, which, to be fair, is true for most games on this list, but I had some occasional issues with unresponsive controls, not working how I wanted them to, or the music abruptly changing in distracting ways as I morphed back and forth between my different forms as I both gained and lost health in a fight. It also seems, though I might be incorrect on this, a how far can you get type of game, as opposed to one that ends in a proper boss fight. So will I play this game more? Probably not. I did enjoy playing it and liked some of the game elements that it brought, but I also felt like I had my fill with the game from what I've played so far, and it felt at times like I was playing a cool concept as opposed to playing a completely fleshed out, finished game. As a quick aside though, it is also on mobile, so if you're looking for a mobile roguelite, which are less common, you might be interested in checking this game out. Now let's talk about Outcasts of Orion, which is an auto-battler roguelite. In each fight, you place your heroes and units around this area, and they'll attack enemies automatically based on their attack speed and order. Between fights, you can level up each unit by buying more of them. You can also buy upgrades that give your units more specific boosts, such as increased attack damage or potential stun on hit. There are also relics you can find, which give you run-long, very strong buffs, such as letting all of your units attack twice, for example, if they don't move. Once you beat the boss, once you beat a run, you can do a new run plus up to 3 times to defeat newer, harder bosses and harder enemies that you've seen before. In general, I like the core gameplay loop, but I wish there was more to do in the game. There are some nice strategy elements brought by the unit counter system, and there's nice unit and enemy variety as well, with the different factions you can play as and the units those factions have. But I also already beat the game in under 90 minutes, including being the final new run plus mode. I want to play this game more because I enjoyed the core gameplay loop. I had a lot of fun with it, but I'm not sure if I will because I feel like I've seen so much of what this game has to offer already. Next, Plunge is a turn-based puzzle-like roguelite that plays different than a lot of other roguelites on this list. Your goal is to move around the area, fighting enemies, dodging attacks, and collecting a key to unlock the exit and escape. You have to move pretty deliberately because each move you do slides you to the opposite end. You can't just move freely, you're always sliding to as far as you can go. Because of that movement mechanic, you have to really strategize your moves to do all of this, and it's easy to get accidentally overwhelmed in later levels because they have a large number of enemies that spawn in them. Additionally, you can collect upgrades to give you more health or make you do more damage, for example. And there are also short-term buffs you can find in the form of potions that you can use when you want to. Overall, I like the feel of the game. The puzzle quality of it immediately separates it from a lot of other roguelites for me, and it was simple enough to pick up pretty quickly. I do plan to play more of this game in the future, but I am a bit concerned about the long-term replayability of this game for several reasons, including the simplicity of the game and the fact that levels themselves aren't randomized, but rather you get random levels from a large pool of levels. In other words, if you play enough, you'll get familiar with the levels that you'll find because you will have played them. Still, I want to play more of this game in the future, and as one of the cheapest games on this list, it might be worth checking out yourself. Quest of Dungeons is a turn-based roguelite that draws inspiration from old-school roguelikes like NetHack. Each turn, when you move or attack, enemies move or attack at the same time. You can play as one of initially 4 classes, and the core gameplay loop involves you fighting your way through rooms of a dungeon, looting enemies and the environment, and going down the floors until you face a final boss. You can also collect various items and upgrades along your run, and there are also secret rooms and stuff that you can find if you look for them. I played a decent number of runs with this game, and they were all fairly short. My biggest takeaway from this game is that it was underwhelming. I didn't hate playing it or anything, but I also didn't have a lot of fun playing it, and it just didn't really hook me. The gameplay felt a little simple and unengaging. There are other roguelites in similar styles that just have more depth to them and better hooks to them, and it feels like Quest of Dungeons gets buried beneath those other games. Because of that, it's going back on the Steam shelf for me. Also, as an unimportant aside, this game actually uses the same sprites as the Dungeon Beneath, which I talked about earlier, which is just a funny reminder that these are indie games. They don't all have art teams working for them. Now for Rumours of Elsewhere, which is a 2D platformer roguelite. You play as one of several heroes who all have their own 4 abilities to attack or defend themselves. And your goal is to kill enemies for coins, open 3 chests across the map with those coins, and get to an exit door before the timer runs out. It's a pretty punishing game, and I haven't yet managed to get very far. There is also a progression system across runs you can use to unlock items and upgrades, as well as more heroes and classes for future runs. When I was playing through it, there are some things that I immediately enjoyed about it. I like the art style of the game, the cutscene and background for each character, as well as the variety in the characters' abilities and playstyles. The game just felt fun to play as I was getting into it. But this game also has a lot of jank or clunkiness to it. For example, the UI and its navigation could definitely be improved for controller usage. Additionally, while there is a tutorial, it's easy to forget what the controls are, and the game would benefit from clarity such as letting you know when you can use a heal, use the potion, a reminder of what button goes with each skill, those kind of things. Gameplay-wise, the jump also felt a little clunky to me, a little hard to use, and the AI had a habit of camping on ledges, which made it near impossible to jump up without taking damage. So will I play more? I'm undecided right now. I think there is a potentially really great game at the core here, with the different heroes, ability usage, and other game mechanics that I liked. However, I know that getting more into this game means I'll have to get used to the jankiness of it, which would take some time and effort that I'm not sure that I want to use. Next up, let's talk about Solitairica, which is a roguelike take on Solitaire. The core gameplay involves you completing a solitaire-like game board where you match cards from your deck to cards just one above or below them, while also using spells and abilities for other effects. Depending on your starting deck and within run customization, you can use different abilities by spending different resources that you collect by matching different types of cards. For example, matching orange cards gives you attack energy that you can use on attack spells. You can also customize your spells and items between runs to match the surprising amount of variety of enemies that you'll face along the way. I wasn't sure what to expect going into Solitairica, because the solitaire roguelite sounded a little strange to me, but I actually had a surprising amount of fun while playing through it. You face enemies that have a large amount of variety in the abilities they use, and I've always enjoyed Solitaire, so the core gameplay of Solitaire plus some modifications and extras was fun for me. However, the game does have a strong role of RNG, and there's also some vertical progression required for unlocking each deck and leveling them up, so that might be a turnoff for some people. Still, this game falls solidly in the will play more category, so expect me to talk more about this game at some point in the future. Now for Tangledeep, which is a turn-based roguelite inspired by classic RPGs and roguelikes. In this game, you play as one of 12 different classes and fight your way up a dungeon, looting monsters along the way. At any point, you can return to the town to use the shops and heal up for more looting. The game has many different game modes, but the main game mode includes progression and the ability to save some items across runs for a fee. There's also a decent amount of world building and lore present in the game, which was a nice surprise for me to find. I've definitely enjoyed my time with this game so far, and plan to play it more in the future. My real first impression of this game was that it had a lot more depth and quested dungeons that I talked about earlier, while having the same core concept of classic roguelikes. But beyond that, I just like the character customization, the class options, the progression like owning pets and stuff that I haven't really sunk in my teeth into yet. I had some small negatives so far, such as having to navigate so much UI while playing the game, but still, expect me to talk about this game some more at some point in the future once I've had more time to really dedicate to it. Tiny Shot is a 2D arcade shooting roguelite that draws a lot of inspiration from The Binding of Isaac and the other works of Edmund Macmillan. In this game, you defend against waves of enemies with your weapon, and you can move around the area with a grappling hook and dash movement abilities. Collect various items as you play that modify you in positive or negative ways. So picking up items always has some risk to it because those items could have negative effects instead. It's a very punishing game, so you will die somewhat frequently, but you also get multiple lives per run, so dying once isn't the end. I think this game has potential, and the core movement abilities and fighting are decent. However, there are also various balance changes that I'd like to see with the game. For example, I feel like I spent most of my time running around looking for ammo because you get so little and spend so much of it. And I also died often, but I wasn't always sure how I died, which was a little frustrating to not know how to improve. I also had some complaints with how the game camera worked, in general simple and limited area that you fight in. So will I play this game again? It's not a definite no, but it's unlikely. This game has some good core elements, a lot of unlocks and bosses that I haven't experienced yet, and it's a nice work for a young solo developer, as a lot of these games are actually, but the various janky elements, combined with the punishing nature of the game, make me not want to keep playing. Tower of Guns is an FPS roguelite that has a little bit of absurdity to it. You climb up a tower of guns, hence the name, and shoot and dodge your way through large turrets and flying robots. You pick your starting weapon, and then, throughout your run, you slowly level it up and collect various buffs or weapon modifiers. The game also embraces this low-budget feel, with the dialogue referencing that, and other funny things, and there are secrets you can find scattered across the map that encourage you to break the map in various ways. As you play the game more, you will slowly unlock more starting guns and perks for future runs. I don't think that this game is revolutionary, but I did have fun with it. Its self-awareness was nice, and it was fun to fight through the bullet storm of projectiles and robots it throws at you. The guns also felt different from each other, which was nice, and the leveling mechanic was interesting because taking damage can un-upgrade your weapons at some points. I did, of course, have some complaints with the game, such as how quickly the drops fade, or how often you're just moving in a circle to dodge things, and it can also have that bullet hell quality to it, where you just feel overwhelmed by how many projectiles are flying around you. It's not the most polished game either, but as a whole, I had fun with it. And because of that, I do plan to play this game more in the future, but like so many other games in this video, it's not at the top of my list right now. Zombie Party is an action roguelite that doesn't take itself too seriously. You collect different guns and magical abilities that you can use to clear waves of enemies as well as boss fights. There are 4 different game modes, and I mostly played the adventure mode and the dungeon crawling roguelike mode. The adventure mode is just a giant area with waves of enemies spawning around you, while the roguelike mode has a map you navigate to get to the next stage and boss fights. I haven't beaten either mode, but they seem to have different enemy pools as well. There are also some progression mechanics across runs in terms of unlocking more characters or pets, and this game supports local and online co-op as well. Overall, I enjoyed this game, and it was fun to fight a large number of enemies with different abilities, super weapons that were just quirky, and weapon upgrades that you find throughout your run. While the enemies do seem to lack a little bit of variety mechanically, the weapon and skill variety seems good. However, it's not a really tight, responsive game. It seems like a game that you would play just for fun, for some of that quirkiness, as opposed to games like Dead Cells or Curse of the Dead Gods that have more mastery qualities to them because of that responsive combat that they have. So will I play this game more? Yes, I do think I'll play this game more, but I'm not entirely sure where it ranks on my list of games. And finally, I have a couple honorable mentions for this video, which are basically games that fit my arbitrary, obscure, or lesser known criteria of less than 1,000 Steam reviews. But I've already played them a lot, so it didn't really make sense to put them in an impressions video because, you know, I've played them a lot, they wouldn't be impressions. First, we have Astronarch, which is an auto-battler roguelite with a surprising amount of depth and strategy to it. There is Roguestar Rescue, which combines Gungeon-like bullet hell with tower defense elements. And we also have Urban Cards, which is a card game roguelite that has a tabletop feel to it and also feels inspired by PvP card games like Hearthstone or Gwent. And if you want to see another video like this, please like this video and let me know what games you'd want to see in the next one. I'll link all these games I talk about in the description with both a normal Steam link and an affiliate link that helps out the channel if you use it. Thanks for watching.